All right, man. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, I have Sterling on with me today, hailing from good old Missouri, out in the middle of nowhere, relying on Elon Musk to carry us through today's conversation. Um, I think we have a pretty interesting topic. This is the Dungeon Mastermind podcast. I'm Jake Packham, humble host of this here venture. And Sterling, I think, is going to have some pretty interesting approach to this. He has some unique experience, and without speaking for him, Sterling, I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit for the folks at home.
I am Sterling of Sterling Makes. I got into D&D a couple years ago, and I really enjoyed it. Took to the story, and actually my wife joined in too. We play together, and I started wanting to make a dice trays for myself and dice stands, and then they sort of married, and I started making dice trays that have holders and then I wanted to make them out of more natural and interesting materials. And, for me, the joy of D&D is the story. And I've always sort of had this thought that trees are like story holders. If they could speak, the stories they could tell. And I wanted to have, when you look at a tree and you see all the rings, I immediately think, oh, the stories this tree could tell all these years it's been around. And so I have dice trays, the tree stump dice trays, where you can just look down and just see the interesting wood. And it sort of, to me, it puts me in the mood to really have a good story in the game as well. So I make those. I DM a campaign. We're going on our second year now.
Incredible.
I also play in a campaign with a real professional that makes me feel bad about myself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm learning a lot from him. He's a really cool guy. I really enjoy his campaign and his method of DM. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. Just plugging away, making dice, and enjoying D&D.
I love it. Yeah, folks, y'all got to check out his stuff at Sterling Makes. Correct? That's the handle. It is like custom made from a tree stump. A dice tray where you can roll your dice into the tray. It also has, some of them have like storage where you can line your dice up on the tray, so that they can almost be like a shrine to your character as you are building this world with your character. They're incredible. Like the craftsmanship in these things, nuts, man. You had mentioned that you have been doing woodwork for quite some time. Like building your son's crib, which is awesome by hand. Like what originally, because you were talking about like the stories, right? Like the intrinsic like built-in life of a tree, and that's what kind of draws you in. But like, how'd you get started on something like that?
Well, honestly, initially I liked trick boxes, and I wanted to make those. I don't know if you ever saw The Illusionist, but there's a necklace he has in there. And I tried to make a larger version of that. I think I may have just cut out.
No, nope, you're not. Good.
Anyway, I tried to make a larger version, like a trick box for my girlfriend, actually. And I was like, I don't know, I think 15, 14 at the time. And that really kicked it off. Just really enjoyed working with wood, and ever since then, I actually just recently started doing a trick box for D&D, and it was like, it came full circle. I started with a trick box, and I finally had a reason to make another trick box, and it's really cool.
Yeah. That's awesome. Now, obviously, like your D&D experience, you kind of touched on a little bit, like obviously running your own campaign as well as playing, and you homebrew your campaign. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Fabulous. Tell us a little about your world.
So that's kind of funny. I didn't know, like, even to this day, I don't really know exactly how everything works in the actual official D&D realms. And And I didn't want to go about trying to figure out what the lore of this city was and the lore of this world and stuff like that. So I was like, I'm just going to make my own. I have this great idea. I'm just going to make my own. And so in my world, I use a lot of the names, like Bahamut, a lot of the pantheon of gods. I use a lot of them as well. I sort of adapt their backstories for my world.
Mm-hmm.
But I use a lot of that, so a lot of familiar. But other than that, the world is very medieval-esque, you know,
High
knights,
fantasy.
high fantasy, yeah. But the world itself, I actually really enjoy the idea because it's coming. Initially, it was just an idea, but it's like being filled in more and more by the players and by the things that keep happening. It's really fleshed out. But Bahamut is a pivotal character. So in my world, which the players are just now figuring this out, the world has been reset multiple times, but they don't know how. They don't know why.
Sure.
And only one being in all of this has evaded that reset, which is Bahamut, this Platinum Dragon, because he is able to create a material realm by himself that he escapes to and then comes back. So he knows what's happened before, and he's trying to figure out why it keeps resetting, as well as the players are too.
Right.
And eventually some things happen where he's not able to participate with them as much as he was in the very beginning, trying to get them to do stuff and things like that. But they've got a lot of inklings, and it's really fun because, like, if there's a one-shot, like a few people are missing, I'll take them to a different time when they were doing something, and they play through this campaign and see, like, oh, wow, it ended this way this time. Like, and this is how it happened.
Yeah,
But I can just do that anytime someone's missing, and it feeds the mystery, but also doesn't interrupt the play. People can still play and still in the world, and they can use their characters and things like that. So it's really fun to be able to have that. And I had this
filler episode.
I had this one episode where Bahamut was corrupted by something, and he was very weak, and these things were happening, but these visions kept popping out of him of past things that he's experienced. And so every now and then during this big fight, I would have them roll on a random table, and a memory would play that they would be able to see. And again, it's like a little clue, a little inkling of the story. But it's really fun because I kind of try to like observe the things that, like, where they're wanting to go with the characters, so that my stories aren't out of nowhere. They're like, I kind of see this is where you might have wanted to go. This is how it would look if something went a little differently over here. You know what I mean? And just kind of go through it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It also kind of leaves a nice little net for you as the DM because you have a imperfect memory, believe it or not, folks at home. And so if you ever fudge something up, man, you just say, erased.
Now, so far, and I've wondered about that, like, would it be triggering to them if I accidentally set it up so that they, like, it can reset? Because I don't know if I want it to be possible they can reset. It has to be, because like, that's there.
It has
I'm a little concerned because it might, and I don't know if that would be upsetting to them, because I don't want to upset them, of course. I think they would really enjoy it. But that threat has to be there for it to be a part of the story and interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like player character death, right? Like, you have to know, like, you have to be on the line that, like, this combat could kill my character, and you should want it to not happen, right?
Yeah. And I kind of thought if we did reset it, we can kind of go like, well, let's go ahead and go back up to level 8, but let's talk about some of the things that you think you might have done differently if, like, this variable had changed, you know, like, and kind of go through it so that they sort of get a little bit of a fresh start. They can even do a different character if they wanted, or keep the same one but have the backstory a little different, and, like, have it continue that way.
Yeah, I love that. Very cool. Honestly, that sounds like a freaking good time. And story-wise, you have done a good enough job to introduce somebody who's never played before in your world. So that is a testament to a good tale. And a good tale is kind of what we wanted to talk a little bit about today. Obviously, like you had mentioned a couple times now, that like the story of Dungeons and Dragons is really what keeps you involved, keeps you invested into the game. And that's a pretty common theme, right? Like, you're not a weirdo for thinking like, oh, D&D is so great because it's a good story. Like, oh, what hot take,
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's it, right? People play it because it's interesting. The story is evolving and you play a role in it as a character. Um, but there is also, like, it can be whatever you want, but there's also, it relies on this sucker, right? This little
Yeah.
dice that determines yes or no.
I think
Um,
that. Go ahead.
yeah, fire away.
Oh, I think the dice is such a wonderful component because I personally I get attached to my character, and I try not to, but I'm like, I want to see this one through. I got this whole backstory, on that campaign I'm playing a homebrew class. I really want to see where it goes. But at the same time, it's kind of like in life, like the micro to the macro here. We as humans get really attached and we want things to happen the way we want them to happen. And unfortunately, the
Doesn't
world
happen.
doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And we're not able to control everything. And I think in D&D, it's really nice because it simulates that at the same time, and it can help you practice something that you can practice in real life, which is just, okay, that didn't go like I wanted it to. There was a variable there that I can't control. But you know what? I'm going to see where this goes, and I'm going to make a good story out of it, and whatever happens, happens. And the thing about that is, I know in my campaign, I know there's some people who will fudge numbers or, like they really want it to work out a certain way. And I really don't want to do that. And in not doing that, the stories that emerge are better than I could have imagined
Mm-hmm.
because I was like, you know what? And it's almost like faith. I'm not saying it is faith at all. Don't get me wrong. But it's almost like that faith where you're just like, I don't need to control this. Let's just see where this goes. This happened. This was played out. And I think people are way more satisfied with that too. And I think that's the thing about D&D that is so satisfying to a lot of people. I mean, I know there's some number crunchers that just want to roll dice and do math. I've
Yeah.
heard of that. But I still think they wouldn't play D&D if they didn't really like the way that turns out. But, we had a session a couple weeks ago where my wife was a little upset because things weren't going a good direction for her character.
Yeah.
But I was like, hey, I'm playing it the way that this character played it. The roles are the way the roles are going. Let's just see it out. And by the end of the session, we were all like, that was the best session ever. It was just so good.
Yeah.
And it had just come
The
around full
redemption.
circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The dice are a variable that just, we have to let go of control and just go with it. And, you have a bad roll, be like, well, I'm still distracted and disappointed that, my cousin got taken away, something like that. You know what I mean? Like, come up with a story reason for why that might have happened instead of like,
Yes.
I rolled a 2 on perception again.
Yeah.
It's like, I love that because I have a player who's got observant trait and crazy high perception.
Yeah.
And so he rolled low, and I was like, you're just distracted because you think about, and I didn't just make this up and force this on him. I knew that his character was evolving that way. That his cousin had
Right.
recently been taken, and so it really helps to make that story more interesting, more gripping, to make
Yeah.
sense of the roles after you have it.
Well, and I think it makes you a more dynamic player at the table when you approach it that way, right? Like,
Yeah.
if I'm a player character and I am truly letting my dice determine the success or failure and to what degree, it allows me to practice, right? Like, I can practice awareness of the story, awareness of other people and their story and where they're developing, to where, like, maybe stealing off that idea, right? Like, your cousin got taken away, but like, that's affecting me now, right? Like, as your party member, like, when I roll poorly, I am now aware of your situation. And guess what, pal? Like, this is a bonding experience that we're both bombing on these dice rolls. But more than just like, oh man, I'm gonna put these dice in dice jail because they're not rolling well. Like, well, statistically, it's rolling the way that it will. But it allows, like you said, it allows the story to come to life. Because I think there is something profound about having a statistical math rock, where you have a 1 in 20 chance of it going perfectly and the exact same likelihood that it will go absolutely terribly. Um, and there's something really beautiful about that. Like that, it's the same in real life, right? Like I could get the job of my dreams and be fired 2 weeks later, or something outside of my own efforts, like 2008. Market crash. You're a real estate agent on the top of your game, killing it. 2008 happens, market crashes, and you are toast. But like you have no control of that.
Yeah, yeah,
And so now you got to do something, right? You can sit around and twiddle your thumbs, or you can go out and make something of yourself still. But the dice determine what happens now.
yeah. And it's I remember when I first started playing, I was like, I only have a +2 in strength. Like that's such a small amount. But the thing is, those stats aren't supposed to be huge. It's just offset the chance by a little, but it's not supposed to negate it completely. You're never supposed to be able
Right.
to just 100% never have to worry about chance. But the thing about that, I just realized when you were talking, it's almost making sense of madness. Whenever you are dynamic, like you're saying, you come up with a story for this role, and and this whole bonding experience happens. It's making sense of madness there, and like in the world, I do this all the time myself. Um, a little more faith based in my life, but it's like this happened for a reason. Let's make
Right.
sense of this madness instead of just being like,
Right.
oh, well, market crash. I'm just always getting bad rolls. I guess whatever. I mean, like that's a very defeatist attitude, but also
Mm-hmm.
it's not as productive and it's not as enjoyable. And that's the thing. That's what I'm saying here is that when those bad rolls come in and it seems like it's going to be bad, if you roll with it, the story is so satisfying that comes out of that. Even if you die, you and your friends are going to be talking about that for years to come. How awesome this scene was where you lost your life, and if you lean into it and just really go with it, you can be this fantastic story that lives on.
Yeah.
And to an extent, not to harp on the trays, but that's something I like doing with the tree stump trays. It's just I design each one of those specific to that piece of wood. I literally take a picture of that piece of wood, I put it in the software, and I design the tray for that one. And I don't really have a formula for that, but it's almost like
Sure.
making sense out of this madness, like this random shape. Like, where would I put the dice? Where's the most efficient way to, get a rolling area and things like that? And I like it. I love that process.
Yeah.
Each one is different. There's no staple, and I can't control what the wood looks like when I cut it. But I definitely, try to make sense of that and make it look really satisfying and cool
For that wood.
for that wood.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, I think that's wow. Awesome little catalyst there for conversation. Um, Brilliant. Because people, like, people, everyone knows someone in their life that's like, oh, they are always so positive. It doesn't matter what they're going through. Like, they're always able to bounce back. Like, that's not just an inherent trait, that's
Right.
100% a skill, right?
Yeah.
That is something that is developed, that they didn't just wake up one day and they were, right? Like, you didn't look at a piece of wood one day and say like, ah, yes, the tree has spoken to me. I know exactly what you intend to be, right?
Yeah.
But like that's years of practice and thousands of hours trying to look for what it could become. And and again, right? Like I've kind of harped on this on the last couple episodes, but like the whole like beauty of Dungeons and Dragons is not the fact that you can go in and pretend to be a high elf paladin that goes off and kills a dragon. Like that's all well and cool, but like the whole point of it is to like that there's something profound in these weird whimsical stories that allow us to practice life in a
I agree.
way that is fun and with other people and that is so much lower risk um, that like practicing bouncing back, practicing rolling with the punches, rolling with the nat ones, and choosing to make every reaction worth having a story about. Um, yeah, man, I think that's awesome. That's really cool. Um,
I mean, you can practice humility with a bad roll.
yes.
You know,
Hmm.
you're fantastic paladin that is so amazing and has all this charisma and gets a bad roll. You can. emulate and practice humility and take that and make a story out of that, character. And like you're saying, I think the one-to-one comparison, what you can practice on the micro of D&D can be applied in real life if you so choose. And I think
Right.
life lived in a shallow well is not very fun. But if you go into the depth of it and you really try to understand yourself and what you're doing in the game, what you're doing in life, and you look for those parallels, you get so much more out of everything. It's much more enjoyable.
Yeah, no question, man. No question. And like again to like bring the whole dice aspect of it, right? I got a tray full of all the dice that I hoard like a dragon. That like I love these little pieces of plastic or metal, and like the satisfaction of rolling them is not like because they make a cool sound when they hit the box. It's like this is putting my idea into the hands of statistics, like
Yeah.
saying this rock, this piece of metal is going to make my idea happen or it won't, is awesome. I
Yeah.
love that so much. And
Yeah, there is that sensation when you pick it up, and it's like, I want this to
pressure's
happen.
on.
I want this to
Yeah,
happen. But at the same time, in my mind, I'm like, but if it doesn't, it's okay.
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
go with it.
yeah. And I know you've talked about this a little bit, like like you tie this to faith a little bit, and I myself have a Christian background and faith, and so like it's hard to not talk about these things and then also tie it back into like a faith understanding if that's like your perspective, right?
Yeah.
And so like yeah, absolutely, like having the trust and the desire for it to succeed, but also having at the same time the willingness for it to not work out and be okay with that, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Having
it doesn't have to be faith based, but the parallel would be silly not to comment on
right,
whether you believe in deity or some intelligent design or just the universe, whatever it is. The point is going through life and saying you want to put effort into the things that you want, obviously, but there's also this sense of putting some faith in some higher power, whatever it is, when things don't work out. Like, and you could not do that. You could. You could think you're just being blown around, and that's fine. I don't mind that perspective. If somebody has that, but for myself, I choose to go through life um, looking for purpose and meaning in things, so that I can get the most out of every situation that I can. And with the dice, it is a parallel. Like, put your faith in the dice, and I'm not saying literally put your faith in the
right.
dice,
I
but it
worship
is.
this dice here.
It's almost, you could say, not my will, but thy will be done, which is a
Sure.
very religious statement, but at the same time, it applies to the dice. Like, this is what I want. If
Hmm.
you don't choose to let that be a reality, not my will, but thy will be done, and I'm going to go with it, and I'm
Right.
going to make the most of it, and that's it. Like, I don't
Right.
think there's anything wrong with that parallel, religious or not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. Like, because I think it is something that can often take the wind out of your sails, right? Like when somebody is really buying into a role play, and really putting in the effort to like make something truly persuasive, and then they just bomb the persuasion check, right? Like trying so hard to put in on that. That like, is there a time that you feel a check would be offset, right? Like choosing to opt out of rolling the dice in favor of good gameplay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like to reward role play. I think that's a great thing to do. I still don't want it to be completely dictated by how well you can act over other players and things like that.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like, if a player comes up with something that is very convincing and heartfelt and interesting and or story, whatever, yeah, I might say roll with advantage or maybe mentally lower the DC in my mind a little bit. I still got, for me, I still leave it up a little to chance because I just I have to.
Yeah.
I have a very acrobatic character that tried to do something, and he's a Tabaxi. He should have been able to do it. But I was like,
Yeah.
let's still roll just to be sure. And
As
he
long as
rolled
it's
a
not a
nat
nat
one, and
one.
it's like,
Ah.
hey man, I'm sorry, but the story that came out of that is so cool. He
Yeah.
rallied, came through it, did another acrobatic thing right after that was super awesome. Did this thing with Bo, it was fantastic. We love it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nobody's sad that I had a roll.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I had a very low DC because
Sure.
what he was doing.
Everything
I was
indicates that this should happen. Yeah.
so I don't think I would ever forego a roll, but I might lower the DC or something, or give him advantage, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, because again, right, like you were saying, that there needs to be a layer of risk to it. But I think from like a dungeon master perspective, I think that can also do a lot for taking the pressure off of you for feeling like you're railroading, right? Like
Yeah,
for having players feel like your story is all that matters, right? But like you say, like you want to do something absolutely breaking the rules of the game, roll 3 nat 20s in a row, no questions asked. It is done, right?
yeah,
Um, but like, and leaving it to them in that role to say like, I don't think this should happen, but because I'm fair, if it happens, it happens.
yeah. And to your what you said before we started, you were talking about the different dice. I do use percentile dice. In my world, they have um, these hearts of titans that there's a whole long story I'm not going to go into. But the point is, I wanted to have some way that they could commune with them, but not
Mm,
be super easy to do. Also, not super difficult. It didn't seem appropriate to use um, a d20 for it.
yeah,
I didn't even have a DC necessarily. It was just like, well, let's roll a percentile dice. I've got a number in mind. Let's just do it. And it's one of those things where through time, doing that over and over again, it feels balanced. Like they get to commune with that an appropriate amount of time. That doesn't seem too much, doesn't seem too little.
hmm,
It's just something that has worked out. It's not. There's
yeah,
no system behind it. There's no rules behind it. It's something I sort of thought of. I wanted to find a way that they could do that and interact with that, and it seemed appropriate for percentile dice to do that.
yeah. I like that. For the folks who don't know what the percentile dice is, when you get a polyhedral dice set, you get two little D10s. One has numbers in the tens, and one just 1 through 10. You would roll the two together, and that gets you like out of a 100 what your roll is, right? So I just rolled a 49 out of effectively 100, right? Um, yeah, because I like the percentile dice for the wild magic surges. I think that built in with the wild magic sorcerer is really fun. Anytime that a wild magic item can be put in play, I love putting that in just because it just adds a whole extra layer of whimsy and shenanigans. When you get a feather beard, it's like this means absolutely nothing to my character, but everybody eats that up. Like I
Yeah,
rolled an 82 on it, and so now I have a beard, right? Like, or all my hair fell out. Why?
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Um, the opposite of that, though, that absolutely drives me nuts is the cleric, the not channel divinity, the what is
Divine
it? The
intervention. Is that what you're talking
divine
about?
intervention.
Yeah.
That's
See,
right.
that's the thing is I didn't want to use that one because in my world the titans and gods are all a lot closer than that, and it didn't seem appropriate to use. You got to get below your level. It's like,
Yeah.
come
Right.
on.
Well, I'm a level 3 cleric, man. Like
Yeah,
a 3% chance. I mean, I get it, right? Like, because divine intervention can create some pretty ridiculous events, but like, that's the whole point of the character, right? Is to
yeah,
commune with God and make God things happen. Um,
yeah. I kind of have a system that see in my world the gods are a little closer, but they're also not. They know what to expect if they do get divine intervention. It is still awesome, and you're gonna be happy you got it, but it's not going to be as game breaking as everything, which is why I increased the chance of it happening, because that's the
Hmm.
thing. They're closer, so it makes sense to them to have it more often, but not be so game breaking when it does happen, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I just
Yeah.
sort of had to come
I
up with my
like
own
that.
system.
Yeah, because it almost takes that option as playing a cleric, right? Because you can, as an action, use your divine intervention instead of casting a spell, right? But that's never on the table, like that's never
Yeah,
really, something that you would consider as part of your combat uh, economy, you
they
know.
should have just named it. Well, I have nothing else, so why
Yeah, exactly
not?
right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I love that. I would like to incorporate that more, but adjust that mechanic a little bit.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, um, to kind of recap what some of these dice are like. For a lot of folks who have never played before, you get a set of 7 dice, and you're only familiar with one, a D6, right? This is the classic dice that you play any game ever with. But there's also the main dice, which is your D20. This one you're going to use a lot. And I think it's like there is something I really prefer hefty dice. I like to feel the chance in my hand before I roll it. And I am a little bit bummed that you don't use the other dice nearly as often. Um, but that's also a parallel for life. You don't get to use every tool in your arsenal all the time. Otherwise, we'd all be millionaires, and Sterling would be using my internet, not Elon Musk's. But not
yeah.
me.
That is interesting. That's one of the things with the traits. It's always kind of annoying. I can't come up with a standard count of dice because if somebody plays a rogue or somebody
Right.
plays a paladin or somebody plays Warhammer. I just
Yeah.
designed a trait tonight for someone who plays Warhammer. He wanted 36 D6 slots, and that was it.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's all he wanted. I was like, you must play Warhammer. Like,
Yeah.
but the thing is, like, I just try to. One of the first things to do. What's your dice setup? How can I accommodate this? What do you like doing? And let's make it flexible. I even, went to making inserts where you can remove it if you change your dice
I
setup.
saw
And
that.
it was
Yeah, I saw
nuts.
that.
Yeah, because I mean, it's something that's always. I really like the stands I have because they're easy to grab. They're all tidy. I love those.
Hmm.
I've got mine. I got 3 sets of mine. I did just fantastic. Um, but there's no constant on how many dice you use and which class uses and things like that. And when my wife gets to roll fireball damage, she gets to roll all those d6s. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, it's awesome, all right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen for me, who's playing. I'm actually playing a monstrosity and the other one, so I don't get that. But anyway, um, I do enjoy the other dice a lot. I actually really like the D 12. I like the shape, and I just wish I could roll them more, and I just don't. I gotta
Yeah.
get a
Like,
great axe or something.
yeah, exactly right. I agree. I think the D12 is, um, like it to me looks the most symmetrical of the
Mm-hmm.
dice, which is a satisfying look for me. Um, I thought Critical Role did a pretty cool job incorporating like this, dodecahedron into their like world, like with their whole thing.
Yeah,
Um, but like I want to intentionally use these. I love in risky situations when something is like someone is falling off of something, rolling a d6 or a d4 to determine the direction that they're falling, especially if there's like a cliff or, something risky about them making this decision. Using it for like determining publicly the number of traps or villains or whatever, like goons that they're about to face. Goodness gracious. So that there's an anticipation and like some mystery, but also like what to dread now. Like now your fear has a face in the form of a number, you know?
You
Um,
know, that's interesting. While you're talking, I just thought of, when we pick up that D20, there's so much associated with that. Like we identify it as, the decider of my fate. Things like, there's a lot of weight to that. When you pick up your damage dice, that's always going to be good. Usually, you get to roll damage. It's great. The
mhm.
hard part's already over. You already rolled a D20. You can definitely hit.
Right. I
But
hit. Now how bad?
yeah, yeah. And to your point, though, I really think that's interesting. Come up with systems in the game where you give weight to these other dice. Like
Hmm.
when you pick up that D6 because you're rolling for, I don't know, become like your directions of where you fall or something like that. Giving weight to that where it becomes more interesting. And I listened to this podcast a while back, Dungeons and Daddies. It's a
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
when they first started, they had it where if you made a dad joke, it took psychic damage, and it was a D4 of psychic
Yeah.
damage.
Yeah.
I think that's an example where you give a D4 so much more memories associated with it because it's coming off the back of, oh man, somebody made a dad joke. How much damage did I take?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that would be cool to do. I've done a few tables where I've used like a D10, like roll D10 to see what memory comes out of Bahamut sort of thing. I've done
Right.
that, but it would be interesting to do that more often with systems that kind of return too. So it's like you develop this memory and this story around that dice itself, and
Yeah.
associations.
Yeah. I had this idea for like barbarians specifically, where like a lot of the damage that they deal is with a D12, right? Because they're usually using big two-handed weapons, and in some cases it's even like 2D12, right? So they can heft out some pretty gnarly damage, but like giving a layer of, because a barbarian, they rely on rage, and they are a martial class where they're mostly tanks, right? They're the guys up front and just, oh, I would like to rage, like whatever. Not a super interesting character or class, in my opinion. To each their own, but like I want a little more depth to it. But like incorporating that same damage dice, that when you are raging, a 1 in 12 chance that it like doesn't work. Like, because the rage it can be pretty stacked where you half all martial damage, all slashing, bludgeoning, and piercing damage. Like that's pretty dang great, unless you're fighting like an actual dragon and like the cold damage eats you up, whatever, right? But like especially early on, like I would like you rage. That's great. Well, it didn't actually work. You are angry, but you're still going to take full damage on this. Just I don't know, like something workshop to try and make the character more interesting by incorporating the risk of it not working out.
Yeah, I think with that it could be very punishing if it didn't just straight up work. But if you associate certain attributes, give them a number and say, roll a d6, and if you get like a 6, everything works just fine, smooth. But if you
Yeah.
roll a 5, like maybe you don't get immunity to slashing, or
Right.
like
Yeah.
take
Yeah. Yeah.
just some features
A
of it out.
degree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That way, it does work all the time, but it doesn't always work as well. Which I
Yeah.
think that would be interesting. And as somebody who has played just a little bit of a barbarian in one campaign, I think that would make it interesting for sure. And I would love
Yeah.
that because I love good story. For the more mechanical minded, I think maybe a discussion first would have to happen. But I would like that
Yeah.
personally. I think it's a great
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. Well, and again, like again, I love the wild magic aspect of it. And if I ever play a barbarian, you gotta go with the path of the wild magic, because again, you're incorporating that same thing. Every time you rage, something unique happens.
Yeah.
where like I think one of them is like you just have pixies floating around you, like nothing else happens. You just have some pixies around, which is again just like funny. But sometimes it's like you deal thunder damage around you to make your rage more interesting. Which again just comes back to that's life, man. Like it it isn't going to work out exactly the same way, and having this fixed finite rule to it makes it the most relatable. They're so great, man.
Yeah, for anybody that's new or even a veteran to D&D, and I'm pretty new. I'm pretty green. I really would encourage to just sort of have more of a receptive mindset to letting what happens and just making a good story out of it, because it's just so satisfying. And these fixed rules that he's talking about, and the system he was proposing for the barbarian there, that's something that may seem punishing, but without any risk of there being some negative outcomes and some great outcomes. You don't have as good a story. You got to have some potential for risk and failure to make it so satisfying when you succeed and so enjoyable. So, my wife had a character who missed so much early on in the campaign. And then this other campaign we're playing, she has a character that hits all the time. She's like, I swear that character is just cursed. But I'm just thinking, that character is interesting. That comeback story is going to be awesome when she levels up and starts slamming with these fireball after fireball sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be really interesting. That's a good story.
Yeah. Yeah. I played a couple games with my family and my brother, very similar. We built him this monk character, and could not hit a dang thing for the life of him. And he was getting so mad that he could, even at a level 3, you got your attack and then your bonus action flurry of blows, and so you're like dealing out a couple hits, and he was hitting none of them. So the second time we played, he ended up dealing like the killing blow on the guy, and so it was like, it was fun to be able to spin that of like you were intentionally missing, like storing up kinetic energy. And he's a monk of the way of the open hand. And so like, describing how like these spectral hands encased his own as he like bludgeoned this dude to death. And it was like he was just all over it, and everyone was stoked. It was like 2 a.m, so as stoked as you can be at that late. But like it was so much more satisfying that way. Frustrating, no question, but like that comeback is what's satisfying. That's why Captain Marvel's like the dumbest freaking Marvel character out there. She has no difficulty in her movie. Her movie was garbage because the difficulty is, oh man, well, let me just fly through the ship. Like, oh, an entire fleet. I'm like, okay, like there is no struggle, there is no risk. You just break everything. Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to add some more systems that use some of the other dice. I really like the idea of giving more meaning and purpose and excitement about those other dice. I think that's a really good thought. Not to go back to that, but I'm mulling that over, thinking about how I can apply it.
Yeah. And guys, if you have any ideas, please, like and that's one of the great things that I've noticed about like the D&D community specifically, is nobody thinks they've got it made, right? Nobody thinks that their system is perfect. And like, we all want to make the game more fun. We all want it to be more interesting and more engaging and involved. And like, everyone's open to that, like if someone has a cool idea, like I'm going to steal that and everyone's going to love it. And I love that that you're stealing it, right?
Well, I 100%. I browse through the homebrew section. I browse through. I love getting. I've used so many things in my campaign that I've, seen on Reddit or GM Tools or whatever that website is. I love it. I don't.
Yeah.
Most of my NPCs have homebrewed subclasses because I just love using them. It's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, and now with like all the social media stuff, it's too easy to find good quality content
Oh
that people are just, forking out because they have good ideas. And what good is a good idea if nobody's using it? So,
yeah. There's a guy on Instagram. I think it's Air Pocky or something like that. I think. Anyway, he had a big source drop that was like perfect for my campaign. It was all about divine items and stories and stuff like that. I was like, I'm using these because my
yeah.
character's about to go somewhere where they can come in contact with. These are great. And then after that, he started coming out with elemental stuff, and it was like my campaign before I even knew he did that was already going in a direction where I was going into the elemental planes, and I was like, this is perfect. I
Yeah.
even commented on it. How do you do this? You're following my campaign so well.
Yeah.
And source books are
Yeah,
great.
I actually think I follow that guy because he's doing like keys right now. I think is his thing, and like all the keys are so freaking brilliant that like I want to just incorporate them everywhere. Like he has one that's like the key of locking, where it doesn't unlock a single door, but it can lock anything. Like you put
So
it in any keyhole, locked. I was like, brilliant, man. The shenanigans that would come from that item, unlimited.
yeah,
Just a good time.
that's interesting. I do. I tend to make homebrewed a little overpowered items, and I have to make my encounters more massive to account for
Sure.
that.
The
But
Dragon
I
Ball
had
V effect.
I had been wanting to make because I still want to give them something. So I've
Yeah.
been wanting to make more trivial items. So that key is a perfect example, but also maybe with those items is something where I could come with a system where I could use the other dice in and with that item to make that more interesting.
Yes. Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so yeah, I like that.
Yeah, like using the percentile dice, like maybe something, whatever potion, like you can turn any liquid into a potion of of whatever this happens, right? And you roll a percentile dice, and if 1 to 10, it turns into a health potion. 10 to 20, that's a poison, or a greater restoration or something, but maybe you don't know until you drink it, so that there is that risk still.
Or
Um,
that locking key, like how many days or hours or minutes does this door stay locked? Roll a
yeah,
d10. Let's see how many minutes. Like,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
trying to keep
How
the
much
boss
time is
out.
this buying you? Yeah,
Yeah. Do you want to have
yeah.
a short rest or what?
Right. Yeah. I
Interesting.
like that. Yeah. Man, thank you for coming on. I like every time I have a guest on here, like I'm just baffled at the ideas and stuff that come flowing. I think this is the way that it should be. People wanting to improve on things, and that's great. Um, I love your work. Absolutely adore it. I think people need to be following this. So how do we support you, man? Like where do we find your stuff? How do we buy your stuff? Where are you?
Well, before that, I want to say I love the premise of your podcast based on what I've seen, and
Yeah,
so yeah,
thank you.
I hope that people follow your podcast and continue this because the concept a life unexamined is not worth living. I think D&D unexamined is not worth playing. Like it's great what you're trying to do here. I love it. So as far as me, um, you can follow me on Instagram at Sterling Makes. We also, my wife just went through all the work to do a website,
Nice.
sterlingmakes.com. And with that, you know, we'll put all our trays on there and stuff like that. But she also wants to do more of the, gallery of pictures we do on the side, like things we're doing on the
Mm,
side and stuff like that. So it would be a good place to check out too. And if you want to buy, you can buy there. I will say, I know trays are expensive and completely unnecessary. Believe me, I know. Um, but what I am trying to do is I want every tray to be more than just something you roll your dice with. I've had so many
right.
people like they're like, hey, I want to do like one guy had the symbol that was important in his campaign engraved in the middle, and then the initials of all the players around it, and
So cool.
they bring their campaigns to them or their stories, and that's what I want. Like, if you're gonna
Yeah.
spend this money on a dice tray, let's make it beautiful. Let's make it specific. and let's make it a part of the story that you're doing. Like the stories need to be represented there. And so
Amazing.
I always hope that by the end of my relationship with the customer, we're like, some level of friends, because there's a lot of back and forth. And one guy, he turned me on to an awesome book series, the Cosmere series, because he loved the Cosmere series, and we worked on that and put that in his tray. So it was trading it more than just I'm rolling dice there. I had
Yeah.
a whole story to it by itself. So if you do follow, you can just see the stories. I try to do what I can. I'm not good at Instagram, but I'm trying. But yeah, I'm on Etsy too. It's Sterling Makes everywhere. I have Sterling
Yeah.
Makes. So if you want
Great.
to find me, just type that and you'll find me somewhere. And
Okay.
yeah,
I'm gonna put all your links and stuff in like the show description so people can find you. We're gonna be sharing the heck out of you, man, because I think your work needs to be seen, it needs to be found. It's special stuff. Um, I massively appreciate you coming on, man. Seriously, it like is really cool to connect with people across the freaking country over something as silly as a game might be, and make something more out of it than just dice and imagination.
yeah, I appreciate you too.
Um, yeah, thanks again, man. Appreciate it, folks. Thanks for coming on and enjoying this with us. Go show some love to Sterling. Go show some love to your other craftsman friends. That's how we make the world go round, man. Go play some D&D. Go make it important. Roll some nat ones and make a good story out of it.
Yeah.
Adios, folks. Thanks, man.